what we're seeing is patients needing a couple fewer visits to achieve the same outcome. And so like, okay, well, the total cost of care goes down for that patient. So it's like an insurance policy for your insurance policy, right? Of, hey, we're going to put you on this technology. You're going to most likely be more adherent, more engaged, more empowered throughout the process. You're probably going to require a visit or two less. And as a practice owner, I'm okay with that because my margin overall is going to go up. So instead of making $250 on that episode, I make $300 and can pay my clinician more and require fewer visits. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata, talks with Steven Coen, the CEO of Sara Health, a company that helps you increase your practice's revenue with RTM. Paul and Steven talk through how much your clinic can make with RTM, what clinic owners misunderstand about RTM, and the overall benefits of implementing it. If you'd like to learn more about Strata, head over to stratapt.com or email us at hello@stratapt.com. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
So, Steven, here's the thing, man. RTM, it's one of those things to me where I feel like the more and more I talk about it with our clients, the more it's sort of like, I don't know, I just feel like I get lame excuses about why people aren't doing it. And it's usually, look, I don't have like any skin in the game here, right? It just feels like I'll talk to a bunch of our clients and every once in a while, like I'll be like, oh, hey, so what's your plan with RTM? And inevitably some of the comments I'll get kind of feel hand wavy. They're like, oh, it seems like a lot of work for not a lot of juice. It seems like one more thing to me for me to put on my providers, and God, it's hard to hire people these days, and I just don't want to add one more thing to their plate. So if I'm hearing that and I'm not even like in RTM software, you must hear it more. So what like, is that all is that just kind of fake excuses or something like that? What's the deal? Why is everybody pushing back against RTM? It feels like.
So it's fair, and we hear that too. We hear that too. There seems to be an assumption that has been perpetuated by a lot of software out there that it can't be simple. And I think that's really what the concern is these practice owners and leaders are thinking, there is no way this can be easy. There's no way this can be simple. And that's the true barrier to this. And then you can make up everything after that, right? So there's your foundational, okay, there's no way this can be simple. And so then I can make all the myriad of problems that you just cited, some of the more hand wavy, right? And I think in particular, is the juice worth the squeeze? It's like, well, you did MIPS, so like, how can you can't say both of those things of like, oh, we're going to invest a ton of time, money, effort, resources, everything else into MIPS for maybe 1%, I think, right? For some folks, and we're not going to do RTM, which we've seen be able to provide, double-digit increases to net income. Like those two things don't go together, right? They can't exist logically.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So you just mentioned double. I forget exactly how you said it, but you said something like you've seen double-digit increases for people using RTM. What can you just talk about that? What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think of one of our clients, they're really, really uniquely located. So they're right here. There are 3 senior living facilities, like basically this cul-de-sac, and they are right there. And so they're 95% Medicare, I think. They've got about 5 providers outside of Chicago, Illinois. And for them, they are just crushing it. But they were so worried about the start of this year where, okay, now those 3 to 4% Medicare cuts are going to hit them uniquely hard, right? Versus other practices that may have a better payer mix. And so for them, they didn't feel like they really had a choice if they wanted to continue to provide the one-on-one care that they do, and be able to continue with a personalized approach. Like, look, we don't want to become, one of the big box stores that is cycling 4 people in an hour. That's just not the care that we want to deliver. But we're now getting put in between a rock and a hard place to figure something out. And so for them, you just do some back of the envelope math. On average, they're getting about 30 patients per clinician billable on any given month, right? And so if you just say Medicare, okay, let's say it averages out to $60, right? It's 76 for the first month, 57 thereafter. 60 is a nice, a nice round number. If each practitioner is generating an extra $1,800 a month, of which about 75% of that is going to be almost straight to the bottom line, right? That's a massive change to your net income at the end of the month and at the end of the year. Multiply that by 5, it gets even better for this one practice. And that's for just Medicare. And as we're seeing the commercial reimbursement start to, I think it's always been there, but people have just been too scared or reluctant, I guess maybe a little bit of A, a little bit of B, to bill for the commercial insurances for a variety of reasons, which we can absolutely get into. We're seeing some blues plans paying $100 for that engagement code per 30 days, right? And if, for our pricing model, about in that specific, so $100, around 85% of that is going to go more or less to the bottom line, outside of some additional effort for your clinician, however you want to pay that. We have some ideas on how to do that. But if you're only making, let's say, $15 in margin per visit, and then you can throw $75 in margin from a single RTM month, well, that's 5 visits. That's major money. And so I think just looking at it from, is this worth it from a top line perspective? Like, oh man, I get like, $70, $80 for a visit, and I'm only going to get 57 for a month of RTM. Well, maybe that doesn't make as much sense, but that's a really incorrect way to looking at it, because that's not apples to apples, because it's higher margin reimbursement than a visit.
I think that's a subtle but really important point that I don't think enough people think about. And you and I come from outside the outside the healthcare world, right? And so, like on the investor side, we talk a lot in the tech world. When I come in on the investor side, one of the things we really talk about is sort of lifetime value per account, and it's a nerdy way of talking about every additional dollar you can earn off of an existing client is essentially going directly to the bottom line. And
Yep.
And I feel like that's not something that people talk about or think about on the business side of healthcare these days, which I would just say, just to recap what I think you're saying in sort of layman's terms, it's like you're already seeing the patient, you're already going to bill for that, you're already going to have to then subsequently fight with the lower reimbursement rates year over year. You're already doing all this stuff. And to turn on something that would essentially create a higher lifetime value of dollars per existing account. I mean, it's almost like you kind of have to do it. A
no-brainer, right? As in even more layman's terms is what we hear a lot. Like, this is a no-brainer from when folks finally start to get into it. We hear that.
Right. And I think the other thing that may be outside the scope today, but just worth mentioning, is that I think the other thing is that people kind of seem to, at least the ones I talk to, seem to, in their thoughts and their actions and their behaviors when they think about RTM, they're sort of thinking about the patient demographic as this sort of fixed, finite set of people. And depending on payer mix, it's almost always like, I'll probably get no friends for saying it this way, but they're like, oh, it's just all older people. They don't understand tech. It's just not worth it. And it sort of falsely implies that there's not new patients coming down the pipe over the next couple quarters. Like, right? Like, that people are constantly aging in. And the expectations are different. Like, my mom is in the demographic, and maybe 10 years ago, the idea of giving her like something that was RTM would be like crazy. But now she sort of expects it. Like,
Yeah.
and if she doesn't get it, she's going on YouTube, which is terrifying and amazing, but it is what it is. Um, so, okay. So we talk, like, as we talk about those objections though, like, are you seeing other objections in your line of work with Sara that like I'm not seeing? So, I kind of implied I'm hearing, oh, it's complicated, it's not worth it, whatever. But are you hearing other objections commonly as well?
Yes. One of the things that we've been hearing a lot recently, especially now that the the belief that commercial payers won't pay for this is starting to die away, like it should. It's in medical policies. You can look it all up. And we've seen great reimbursement for our clients across Blues, United. United actually in particular is pretty darn good about RTM, Humana, Cigna, and others. And we talked to with a large group that it's in about 40 states, and that they're at the point now where they assume payment. Yeah, we just assume any market we roll this out in is going to get good payment on the commercial side. So that's what they're that's their mindset, and it's becoming ours as well. One thing we hear is concern about the patient having to pay more, and so, the patient's on a high deductible plan, and they're going to have to pay for this out of pocket. And so I think there's two things there. One is I consider myself at least a decently educated patient now, but I probably wouldn't notice. Like, oh, that was more expensive, but like, it is what it is, right? In the same way that providers, they get paid what they get paid, and they're kind of like, well, it is what it is. Like patients, we think a lot of it the same, and we don't have the curse of knowledge that these practice leaders have of exactly how it all works, right? And I think this truly this curse of knowledge. My wife's a nurse practitioner, and we have a 1-year-old, and everything is the worst possible thing it could be, right? I've heard more diseases thrown out that I never knew existed. Because of it, right? This curse of knowledge. And I think that's a piece of it. But on the other hand, I think it also might be incorrect. So we're doing some analysis right now and some research with a practice that we've been working with for, it'll be a year here soon. And we took one of their clinicians, split out the patients into Sara and non-Sara patients, and are now reviewing all the photo scores and outcomes from those patients. And what we're seeing, it's early, and we're not going to publish this. We'll probably do something else more bigger that we will publish. But what we're seeing is patients needing a couple fewer visits to achieve the same outcome. And so, like, okay, well, the total cost of care goes down for that patient. So, hey, patient, instead of saying it's like an insurance policy for your insurance policy, right? Of, hey, we're going to put you on this technology. You're going to most likely be more adherent, more engaged, more empowered throughout the process. You're probably going to require a visit or two less. And as a practice owner, I'm okay with that because my margin overall is going to go up. So instead of making $250 on that episode, I make $300 and can pay my clinician more and require fewer visits. And then you get into access. And Paul, you were just talking about how the patient demographic is changing, will continue to change, right? Well then if all of a sudden you can free up some of that clinic space, you can do what some of our other practices, in particular this one in Michigan, has done, which they've taken the adherence data as well as now a new business model that they can operate under and go to the primary care referrals, physician referral sources, and saying, hey, what do you think PT means? Like, oh, it's all black. It's like it's a box. It's 12 visits in 6 weeks. That's what physical therapy is. Like, well, what if we could break that for you? And how many more patients, or what patients would you send us if we said we could do an eval into RTM? And they've already seen now some low to mid acuity patients flowing into their clinic from these referral sources because now they're not constrained in their mind for the referral to, oh, this has to be someone who is willing to go for 12 visits, is willing to dedicate thousands of dollars, right? All of those resource allotments that was in the PCP's mind of, oh, I only want to give this to patients who will get that value from it. Well, now it's, oh, you can just help any of my patients and I don't have to give them, the NSAID or, prescribe another pain pill. Sweet. Like I love this idea. I know that's kind of going off a little bit of a tangent, but there's multiple things there that we're seeing and I'm getting really excited about for the future.
Yeah. And I think, and I don't know that it's totally off to the side or a tangent or anything like that. I think it sort of speaks to the complexity and potentially the upside that's here. And I think, and I'll preface what I'm about to say with, again, we don't have any skin in this game. We're just sort of on the billing side, the EMR side and all that. But with that caveat in place, I would just say that from a directional standpoint, we're headed towards more RTM, not less. We're heading towards, and I say that very broadly, like to your point about more payers accepting it, probably, yeah. I suspect there's going to be more codes over time, there's just going to be more RTM, not less. And I think part of it's going to be driven by the fact that it does drive better patient outcomes. And it'll be interesting to see that report you guys pull together. But I also think it's going to be driven by what patients really want. Prior to COVID, the idea of telehealth visits was foreign, and now 3-4 years into the whole, I don't think we're in a pandemic anymore. But anyway, the point is, 3-4 years after telehealth really sort of blew out and became sort of mainstream, I don't go to the doctor, unless the virtual telehealth person says, hey, this is a little outside the scope. You need to come in. So I don't know. Maybe that's a little hand wavy, but RTM today sort of feels like where general telehealth was 3 or 4 years ago. And I think there is going to be sort of a first mover advantage for practices that kind of pick it up here ASAP. So
completely agree. And you can see they started out in 2022, right? It was only for musculoskeletal and the respiratory system. In 2023, they added cognitive behavioral therapy. 2024, I don't believe they're adding any more systems, but now they're allowing federally qualified health centers as well as RHCs to be able to bill on top of their lump sum payment. So they're still adding to it in a different way, as well as I think they're talking about the general surgery, like the bundle payments and being able to have this on top of that as the RTM codes on top of that as well. That's proposed, right? So still to be seen on what Medicare ultimately decides to do. And then you get into a little bit too, like it's not RTM, but these caregiver education codes are super interesting as well, especially when I think of our clients that are in the senior living, so whether that be assisted or independent setting. And I think about, one of the reasons I get so passionate about this is my grandpa has battled Parkinson's for over a decade now, and there was a lapse in PT and OT when he was in the hospital, and nothing short of criminal. We'll leave it there. But nothing short of criminal. And seeing when I went out and visited him and my grandma last, seeing how important the OT in particular, the impact that OT had in training my grandma how to better help him get out of bed, use the walker, like those things, 100% we should be paying for that. Like, holy cow, that is such valuable information and so much, both IQ, so right, the intelligence and the studying and everything that got to that clinical expertise to be that high, but I'd say as well as the EQ, right, and that emotional understanding of, hey, I can help understand what you're going through. Now I'm going to teach you how to be able to help either yourself or your loved one, right? And to date, that's all been donated, and it shouldn't be anymore. So I think there's a whole avenue there, and we can talk about that if you want to, but it's just been donated, right? Like, hey, this is what we do. You get home exercises. I'll answer that email. I'll answer that call. I'll answer that text. And that's just been the status quo. And stop. Like, you're artificially deflating the true cost of care to all these payers, so they're getting a better, like, they're not actually paying for everything that you're delivering. Like, that doesn't make sense. You can't do that, because if you do that, then they cut from there, not from what you're actually delivering. And I think that's part of what's gotten us into this reimbursement problem. Is there's a mismatch, because payers look at and you know this better than I do, right? But the payers look at what codes have been billed, and that is the assumed care that was delivered. And so if you just have this bucket of, oh, here's a bunch of other cool stuff that we do that our patients really like and are extremely valuable and helps with our adherence, and it's not there, it's not in the claim file, then like it didn't happen. At least to the payer, and that's artificially deflating the true cost of care.
Yeah. Earlier you started going down this path of talking about 2022, 2023, and what's proposed in 2024. I'll preface this question by saying, obviously nobody knows the future, but we all like to be armchair quarterbacks. So based on what you have seen and kind of your instinct for the future, what does the next 5 years of RTM look like? It's easy for me on the outside to just wave my hands and say, well, there's more RTM, but what does that actually mean? So from your perspective, what does RTM look like 5 years out?
I think you're going to continue to see systems get added, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if wound care in particular came through over the course of the next few years. That makes sense to me. So seeing other systems get added, that makes sense, especially anything that can be picture related, right, where it's still patient self-reported. It doesn't fit into a device function like the remote patient monitoring side. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see different systems, like, I guess that would fall under pathology, I believe, for wound care. It probably isn't 5 years, but I could see in 10 years that RTM as we know it goes away, and it's the carrot right now. It's the carrot to value-based care, and at some point the proverbial stick will come. And so I wouldn't be surprised if RTM doesn't exist in a decade and instead been replaced by something probably more complex. Which, to your earlier point, like, if you don't get on it now, I'd much rather learn how to ride a bike with training wheels than get thrown on a gas-powered one and told me, "Oh, good luck," for my first time around. So that's what I think will happen. If not in the Medicare space, at least in the commercial space. I think it's also very possible what we're already seeing with the data is, okay, I can, based on how someone is responding within the first few days, we already know if they're going to be in what level they're going to engage at for basically the rest of the episode of care based on all the other patients that we've flown through. So with that data, knowing that within 5 days, I very much see a business model and a product for us where we're able to tell that, either whether it's the clinician or the practice leader, whoever, like, hey, Paul has been verbose in his responses, and based on what we know of past patients like Paul, he is likely to continue to be engaged throughout the entirety of the plan of care. We think you can go to a longer cadence in between visits to be able to do that. You would have, in a pre-RTM scenario or pre-Sara scenario, you would have seen Paul 12 times. We think you can see him 8, charge United for 10, or roughly 10, and that's you being able to have shared savings there. So I think ultimately that's where it's going to go.
Super interesting. So now maybe from there, sort of switching gears over to something you'd brought up with us earlier in a previous conversation, was something about what you call, and I'm just trying to lay it out. I don't want to steal your words. You talked about sort of the 3 levels. It's number 1, how practice owners are thinking about RTM. The second, what you're seeing at the provider level. There's some stories there, I think. And then the 3rd level, I think, was patient level. Particularly, there was a patient, go 30 for 30. Oh, yeah. There's a story around that. So however you want to talk about that concept, whether it's all 3 levels or one of them, we had made a note that there was like something really interesting about the way you were talking about that.
Perfect. Yeah, happy to do that. So yeah, the 3 core groups, right, that are involved in this. You have the patient, the provider, and the practice leader owner, right? Those are the 3 core groups, and we've had challenges and successes in all 3 that we've seen. And one of our on the patient side, a couple of cool stories that I think are worth telling. One is our first patient to go 30 for 30, right? So these codes, at least the engagement code 9977, operates on 30-day cadences, right? And so our first patient to go 30 for 30, we're pumped, like, oh, 100% adherence? This is sweet. And so we emailed the patient and said, hey, can we talk to you? We love to learn about your experience, and da da da. And we get a very short response of, no, I don't want to talk to you. We were so confused. How? I don't understand. Like, you obviously got value out of this, I think, or else we're missing some huge, insight here. And so we called the therapist, his PT, said, hey, what's going on with this? We're really kind of concerned. Like, what's going on? And the therapist said, oh, well, that patient had an accident about a year and a half ago and lost 90% of his hearing. He doesn't like the way that he sounds. And so even in clinic, all his answers were typically 1-2 words tops. And having the ability to communicate in between visits in a way that was prompted and focused allowed them to really flourish in their patient and provider relationship. So it was a real unlock for that patient and his care, as well as his relationship with his PT. So that was super cool to get that. Another recent story, which you might find interesting, is about 90% of patients believe that our daily question is generated by their therapist. So they're so accurate that they think it's their PT legitimately checking up on them every single day, which is great. Like I want to make that 100%. We had an intern mistake, and it actually ended up being a really cool experiment that we won't run again. But we accidentally set one of our clinicians, all their patients, to Spanish, and none of them speak Spanish, as we learned. And so we saw just the non-standard response just shoot through the roof for this one PT, like, what's going on? Figured out we had sent all his patients on that Sunday, sent them all the Spanish version of the text that day, and the responses were hilarious. Like, ha ha ha, Mike, I haven't taken Spanish since 3rd grade. And we're just sitting there, holy cow, this is good enough to where you think your PT sent you a text in Spanish? That's amazing. That's like, okay, we're on to something. I think we have something here. So that was that was a couple of interesting stories that on the patient side. On the therapist side, I think 2 I'll highlight are one, which was, so we automatically triage every single non-standard response, and it's part of our platform. Is 90 to 95% of our responses are 1 character or 1 word, and so we're able to triage relatively easily for clinicians, which they appreciate. They're like, oh, it's almost like form data coming back, unless it needs to be something more. But even in that 5 to 10% non-standard, most of those are what we call elaborations. One of those elaborations was to a question about pain, and the patient responded with 2 because, Lucy, you're a genius. Now, we saw that, like, oh, this is really cool. And so we forwarded it to the practice owners and saying, hey, Lucy's obviously doing a great job with this patient, developing a really good relationship. That's who knows what this can mean clinically, but at minimum, this is really cool. And what they end up doing is sending that out to the entire practice. And so I don't know how many of those how many times does that recognition happen today in status quo? I'd say very, 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 very minimally, if ever, right? maybe people write reviews, maybe they don't. Even then, do you believe it, or do you just think it was a good review because the PT was watching you as you filled out the Google review? And totally get that from a top of the funnel, all that. And being able to highlight some of those have been that's been a really good support for the soul on what we're doing is the right thing. I think the last the second PT story I'll highlight is we have a clinician that's going to make about 10 to 15% more this year in terms of compensation. And so they're going to add more or less a day in clinic without having to add a day in clinic. And I want to see that extrapolate out into all of our clinicians and those that we work with, because you're coming out of PT school with potentially $200,000 in student loan debt, and I think the last APTA report I saw was it's like 100K is the starting salary. That's a long time. You start running the numbers on that, it's going to take a long time to be able to get out from underneath that burden. And so anything we can do to help boost that, the top line salary for clinicians, it's a worthwhile endeavor.
I'm going to say this assertively, and I'm curious if you want to just shoot it down. You're not going to hurt my feelings. But when I think about RTM and sort of what you're talking about, the next 5 years, but also the benefits now and stuff like that, if I was to oversimplify it, it sort of comes down to like the bull case and the bear case. So the bull case of RTM is that by embracing it now, the bull case of RTM is that the practice owner gets that additional margin per patient, better patient outcomes, all the stuff, right? It's like better, happier, healthier patients. Everybody wants that. And also you get paid more. It sort of all works out. That's the bull case. And maybe the bear case of embracing RTM is that, if let's say there was another pandemic or another lockdown or something crazy like that, RTM could be the way you sort of protect yourself as sort of a hedge. Is that a fair statement?
100% on the bull case, and on the bear case, I would say that, or I don't even know if it needs to be a crazy event that happens, right? You continue to see high deductible plans be more and more the norm, right? And so potentially some more cost conscious patients that are coming in and being able to say, hey, we have this ability to get you better, quicker, faster with a lower total cost of care for you. And then you could maybe even say, well, if you can get really good at one clinician being able to have 100 patients on their panel instead of 30 or 40, well, now you can start having some really interesting discussions with employers and other groups and go direct and do contracting with them, right? And that's where we were before these RTM codes came out. Is we were serving mainly physical therapy and athletic training companies that were in direct contracts with employers, high risk employers. Most of the people on our platform were firefighters, the vast majority, and so we were lucky that we were there pre these codes because it was all value based. They just got a check from like Indianapolis Fire, wrote a sizable, multi-million-dollar check to this group and said, hey, take care of all of our physical therapy and injury prevention needs, both for work comp and non-work comp. Go. We don't care. Like, figure it out. And so I see there being more opportunities if you could say, okay, I can handle a higher caseload per clinician. Well, and I need fewer visits. Well, now can I go have conversations with maybe the local fire department, local employers, right? Or other groups, or being able to do really, really cool things with senior living and other areas like that. So I don't know if the bear case is protecting against a crazy event. I wouldn't argue that, but I'd say helping create a more resilient revenue split,
Yeah.
where you can have your insurance, and within that you have your Medicare percentage. Like, okay, I want to optimize for 30% Medicare, 40% commercial, but then I want this other chunk to be through direct contracting, cash services, whatever it is. And so you have this more fragmented revenue base that allows you to be more resilient to anything that happens.
Yeah, and again, speaking as like a non-healthcare guy, one of the things we talk about on the investor side of the tech community is that everything big almost always seems really divisive and almost toy-like at the beginning. And there's no, and I don't mean that with any intent of offense to anybody or anything. All I'm saying is that the fact that there seems to be so much division, at least perceived division, around the acceptance of RTM in the conversations I've had, it sort of feels like when you invest in an early stage product or technology way years ago, whether it's like a Twilio or a SendGrid or something like that, way back then, people are like, "What? That's crazy." Or half the audience would be like, "No, that's amazing," right? And you're like, okay, that divisiveness or that divide means like there's something there. Now it could go the other way, of course, but I don't know. You never bet against that. Like I think there's probably a larger trend there, and I think practice owners that sort of get behind that and ride that wave. I think it's just smart. And again, I don't have any skin in the game. We don't. But anyway, so one thing we haven't talked about is Sara. So let's talk about Sara Health. Why don't you tell us about Sara Health? Give us like the 2-minute overview, and let's kind of talk about the business itself.
Absolutely. So as you've said, you don't come from healthcare. I don't either. So this is my first healthcare venture, which was a bug until it was a feature. And so I'm a frustrated patient. I've had a lot of physical therapy, blown out shoulder, knee. My first job was at Deloitte Consulting, and being out of Kansas City meant connecting flights. So 150 to 200 flights a year, 16, 18 hours a day in a chair. That's the prescription for musculoskeletal pain. And so had a lot of physical therapy, always loved my time in the clinic, but was so frustrated by the lack of continuity outside of it, especially traveling as much and all of that. And so that's where I put the co-founding team together. So found our CTO, and I was getting my MBA at UCLA. He's getting his master's in computer science. And our head of clinical has practiced at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota for almost a decade now. So the triangle, right, of business, tech, and clinical together, the holy trinity, if you will, in health tech. And so that's where it came from. And we honestly believed that if we made something wonderful for patients and providers, someone would pay for it. And we were right to a degree. Now, you've talked on the investor side. If you would have seen a true representation of what our total addressable market was pre these codes coming out, it was hilariously low. You wouldn't have touched it with a 10-foot pole. But all we cared about was engagement. And I hear some people say like, oh, these RTM codes are home exercise codes. I'm like, no, there's nothing in there about home exercises. Not that can't be a very great way to grab data, but you're looking at it in like, okay, they can be home exercises, but it's an engagement code. The code doesn't say, oh, get patient home exercise program, get paid. It says give patient device, have them engage for 16 days in a 30-day period, get paid. So it's an engagement code. It's not a home exercise code. That's just not it. And because we were so focused on engagement prior to these codes coming out, and didn't go down the route that some of our competitors went down, where they adopted like continuing education units, or they went down MIPS or other things, which were brilliant at the time for them. Granted, looking, if these codes wouldn't have happened, be like, yeah, they did it right, we didn't, and the market chose what the market chose. But now that it's flipped and it's all about engagement, well, we've been measuring that for 5 years and optimizing for it. And so when these codes came out, we were just like, let's go.
Yeah.
This is great. and it's been a lot more fun since then. It's a much easier business model, right? So then it was a feature, right? So it was a bug. My lack of healthcare experience was a bug because I naively thought that if I created something amazing for patients and providers, there would be widespread acceptance. But without there being some sort of reimbursement behind it, that is very, very difficult. And now that there is reimbursement, it makes us look smart for having stayed the course through some difficult times. But let's be honest, we got a little bit lucky. Hey, better be lucky than good.
It's well, super interesting story. I think one thing as you were talking sort of makes me think about this sort of like anecdotal idea that I've had for a while, which is that like school and business are two very different things, and so, and I'm saying this very broadly, I'm not trying to pick on medical professionals or anything like that, but the gist of it is that in order for you to excel at school, you have to learn how to play that game really well. You have to take the test the right way. You have to, learn the right thing, take the test the right way, put in the time and do all those things. And then you get into like better and better schools or better, that's how you progress. In other words, to win, the thing about healthcare in general, and maybe most school in general is that in order to progress to the next level of education, you basically have to not only be smart, but look smart along the way. The interesting thing, or I think difference when it comes to entrepreneurship, whether you're a practice owner, business owner like you, or, whatever, is that on the, like you kind of, in this line of work, you have to be willing to look stupid for a long amount of time. And so that's not articulated very well, but I think it's like an interesting sort of difference because I don't think it's talked about a lot. And maybe that's a different episode we'll do some other time. But again, the summary here is that whether you're a healthcare professional or like a tech person or whatever, it's like to play the game of school, to get those advanced degrees, you have to be smart and look smart. And that's the game you got to play. Whereas like when you're in business, whether you're running a practice or your company or mine or whatever, you kind of have to be comfortable with looking stupid, being wrong most of the time, that sort of thing, until all of a sudden you're not. And again, maybe that's a different discussion later, but I think it's one of those things that's just not talked about a lot amongst practice owners. I mean, the things I'll hear practice owners say after 2 beers is very different than what practice owners will say, when you just smash the record button and, they're playing the brain power game or the smart game, I guess. All right. So we've kind of been jumping all around today. What are we forgetting to ask? Like, what are things that kind of excite you that, you're like, man, I wish more people would talk about, or like, and the answer could be nothing, right? But I just want to kind of, you're living and breathing that whole RTM world. You're talking to these providers. You're probably hearing the no's and the yeses and the good stories and the bad ones. What's not talked about that should be?
This will be a bit of a biased answer because we're really good at this. But the daily engagement rate, like how many patients you're actually getting billable, I don't see that talked about. And we actually have it, unless we've changed our website recently, like our daily response rate on our website. And it's not quite as cool as your counter is because it's not as dynamic, which I, by the way, really like that. And maybe it will be one day. But right now, on average, we're getting responses from 70% of patients on any given day. And so, again, this is an engagement code, and it doesn't seem like people are talking about the engagement numbers. And I have a hunch as to why, and I know why we talk about it because it's quite good. And I have a hunch as to why others don't. But I don't think people are talking enough about that engagement and what that could mean. And there's other research that you can look at that shows that an engaged patient does have a better outcome. Right, it's not like it's rocket science. Like, oh, okay, so a patient that feels more loved, more connected with their provider, like, and more engaged in their own care plan gets better. Like, well, duh. You can say it about anything. Whether that's a diet, a skill, and a recovery plan, absolutely. That's where I don't see enough people talking about the engagement. The other thing that I've been seeing a lot recently is this, we started out here, this inability to believe, or this almost like reluctance or just complete stonewall to believe that this can be simple, right? And I think this is where the non-healthcare background comes in, is I don't accept any of those things. Like, why can't it be easier? Well, the clinician needs to bill it. Okay, but how much easier can we make that on them? And what are those steps that they have to do? And how much time does that take? And where's their frustration? Where are the calories spent? Right? And you just go through that process. And for us, I can speak for myself and my team. I mean, we're maniacal about it. Like, okay, so you have to click this, then you have to click this, then you have to click this. Why? And does it have to be that way? Well, maybe not. Could we generate the documentation for you that would make it much easier? Well, yeah, I guess that would probably work, and I still have to put it in my note and all that. The whole idea that it has to be hard because it's healthcare is just that's a hand wavy, like, complete shirk of responsibility. Where no, it can be simple. It doesn't matter that it is healthcare. Yes, it's more complex. It's harder, sure, but it absolutely can still be simple. And I think that's why we get along right so well, is we're both thinking about it in that way of like, I just don't prescribe to this or subscribe to this notion that it has to be hard because it's healthcare. And at that point, you're done. You've given up. It's over. And instead, coming at it from just because it's healthcare, I don't believe it has to be hard. And coming at it that way. And
yeah.
I think it's a complete shirk of responsibility to say that. And you cannot convince me, because I've been on the manufacturing floor at large industrial manufacturers. I've been in the field with elevator service technicians. Like, a lot of it is the same. A lot of it's the same, where you don't, I can tell you that plant manager doesn't want to put anything else on the guys and girls on the line. Absolutely not. It's the same exact thing. Yes, your product is different, but that reluctance and that fear of losing people because you put something else on them, and knowing you have a certain amount of chips to play, right? As a practice leader and owner, the same as a plant manager, is like, if I do too much change, I'm going to really frustrate people. And so if I could, like, that's where we see our goal is make it be as little of a chip that these practice owners have to play as possible. And if we can align all the incentives, well, then it's not a chip they really have to play at all. It's, hey, you guys think we should do this, right? Like, yeah, we should absolutely do this. Like, all right, cool. I get to keep all my chips and you're happy. Fantastic.
I think, it's interesting. I know we're coming up on time here, but I would say, I always think it's interesting when people sort of, so just touching on that one of the threads you just brought up there, like that when practice owners kind of say, oh, well, I don't want to add one more thing to the provider, I don't want to do this or that. The subtle but sort of insidious thing I think about is like, I think it's just sort of a false excuse, in the sense that, like, look, here, the reality is that, if that's the excuse, then you're really just kicking the can down the road. Because, like, the reality is most practitioners, particularly like younger clinicians, stuff like that, they're thinking about their arc of their career. And so, when people say, oh, well, I don't want to add one more thing to their plate, I mean, I get why they would factually say that. I'm not trying to dismiss somebody's gut reaction or feelings or experience. But on the flip side, I don't know, it's kind of like sticking your head in the sand, and it's kind of like, it's kind of like just sort of looking the other way and making some excuse to make yourself feel good. Like, you're probably better off as a practice owner just saying, I don't want to do it right now, and just own that. It's probably better to just own that than to kind of say, well, I don't want to add one more thing to your providers or whatever. Because the reality is that they're not practice owners, but they may want to be. And even if they don't want to be, they're thinking about the arc of their career. And, anybody thinking about their career is thinking about adding more skills and all that. So I don't know how to articulate it, but this sort of excuse of, I don't want to add one more thing to my practitioner, sort of feels disingenuous. And it feels like it's sort of masking the truth, which is, I just don't want to do it right now. And that's okay. Like, let's just at least own it.
So maybe the extra layer I'll bring in there is it feels like they're optimizing for the squeaky wheel, right? So on any bell curve, like any adoption curve, you're going to have your laggards, right? Now your laggards are probably also going to be the ones that are the loudest in your clinic and don't want to do anything new because they don't want to do anything new. And so if I'm a practice owner, like just an employer in general, right? Yes, I think every team is going to have people that have different personalities, right? And if it's like, oh, we need to put this new piece of technology in because it's going to do X, Y, and Z, but I know that Tim is going to throw a fit about it, and you can't replace Tim because there's a massive shortage, right? And Tim's going to throw a fit, and everyone else is going to be somewhere between happy to meh, at least at the start. Well, if you're worried about that piece, and we've seen that play out where we'll have a few practitioners who just like, nope, don't want to do it, don't like this, don't want to do it, da 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 da, and they're typically pretty loud about it. Whereas you'll have the ones that are even crushing it that are just like, I like it, I'm good, I'm going to stay quiet because it's not my job to convert the rest of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that understand that we've seen those personal dynamics play out so often. And so that's probably how we'll have to get better with our discussions with practice owners too of, yep, you're going to have some people that push back against this. It's going to happen. And you're going to have people that are really good at it that probably aren't going to say thank you. Yeah. So like just know that going into it, and maybe that'll help change your calculus a little bit.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata, head over to stratapt.com or email us at hello@stratapt.com.